There is an unspoken rule among those who venture deep into the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. If you hear a knock on your cabin door after 3 a.m., never open it. But what happens when the creature outside doesn't ask for permission? What if it doesn't need a door to get inside? Tonight, we step inside Blackwood Forest, a stretch of land so dense, so isolated, that even the birds stop singing after sunset. What happened to Ethan Miller in the winter was labeled a tragedy by local authorities. But the tape recordings, the police logs, and the bloody footprints left inside Cabin 42 tell a completely different story. Dim the lights, lock your doors, and turn up your volume. This is the nightmare of the unseen guest. Ethan wasn't a hunter, nor was he an adventurer. He was a 29-year-old audio engineer running away from a memory. 6 months earlier, his 7-year-old sister Clara vanished from a campsite in these very woods. Search parties spent weeks combing the brush, but all they ever found was her small silver music box lying in the mud, half crushed under a fallen branch. Devastated by grief and suffering from insomnia, Ethan rented Cabin 42, a secluded 2-story log house sitting 4 miles off the nearest unpaved logging road. No cell reception, no neighbors, no power grid, just a diesel generator, a fireplace, and endless trees. It was 10:30 p.m. on his 3rd night when the storm rolled in. It started with a sudden collapse in atmospheric pressure. The wind roared through the pines, sounding less like weather and more like low, guttural breathing. At 11:15 p.m., the diesel generator sputtered, coughed, and died, plunging the entire cabin into total pitch darkness. Ethan sighed, striking a match to light a scented candle on the mantelpiece. As the yellow flame flickered to life, he noticed something strange. The temperature inside the living room hadn't just cooled down, it had dropped precipitously. His breath formed dense white clouds in the dim light. Then came the first sound that made his blood run cold. From the corner of the room near the darkened bookshelf, the empty wooden rocking chair began to move. Creak, creak, creak. Ethan stared, his heart thumping in his throat. "Draft in the house," he muttered under his breath, trying to rationalize it. But the windows were sealed shut, and the heavy drapes weren't moving an inch. By midnight, the storm reached its peak. Ethan tried to sleep upstairs in the master bedroom, but every time he closed his eyes, the silence of the cabin felt alive. It wasn't silent at all. At 1:15 a.m., he heard a wet dragging noise directly above his ceiling. Scritch, drag, scritch, drag. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across the attic floorboards, something with sharp, unclipped nails. Ethan grabbed his heavy flashlight and a fireplace poker, his knuckles turning white around the iron handle. He stood at the base of the attic ladder, shivering in the freezing air. "Is someone up there?" he called out, his voice shaking. "I have a weapon." Silence. The scratching stopped instantly. Then, from inside the dark attic access hatch, a sound echoed down that made Ethan's knees buckle. Ding, ding, ding. It was the music box, Clara's music box, the exact same melody she played every night before she went to sleep. Ethan's grief shattered his survival instincts. Tears welled in his eyes. "Clara?" he whispered, stepping onto the first rung of the wooden ladder. "Clara, is that you?" He pushed the attic hatch open and shined his flashlight beam into the dust-filled darkness. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating old wooden crates, cobwebs, and something sitting in the far back corner. It was a humanoid figure, nearly 7 feet tall, crouched in a sickening folded posture. Its skin was gray and leathery, stretched tightly over a skeleton with impossibly long limbs. It had no hair, no ears, and where its eyes should have been, there were only 2 deep, hollow, pitch-black sockets. And in its long, needle-like fingers, it held a small silver object, spinning the tiny metal crank, round and round. Ethan gasped, losing his footing and tumbling backward down the attic ladder, crashing hard onto the wooden floor below. The flashlight rolled across the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the room. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, staring up at the open attic hatch. Slowly, silently, 2 pale, 6-jointed hands reached down from the opening, gripping the edges of the wood. The creature lowered itself down, not dropping, but gliding downward with liquid, unnatural grace. Its joints popped and cracked like dry branches snapping in a fire. Ethan grabbed the fireplace poker, pointing it at the monster. "Stay back. Don't touch me." The creature stopped 5 feet away, its pale head tilted to the side at a sickening 90-degree angle. Then its gaping, jawless mouth opened, revealing a rows of black, decaying teeth. When it spoke, the sound that came out wasn't a roar. It was a voice Ethan knew better than his own. "Ethan, why did you leave me in the cold?" It was Clara's voice, perfectly pitched, sweet, and filled with innocent betrayal. "I waited for you, Ethan." It was so dark under the trees. Ethan froze. The psychological trap was complete. The entity wasn't just a physical threat, it was a parasite that consumed memory, trauma, and grief. It used the voice of his dead sister like a fisherman using bait on a hook. "You're not her," Ethan sobbed, tears streaming down his face as he backed toward the front door. "You're not my sister." The entity's face suddenly distorted, its mouth stretched open impossibly wide, stretching from ear to ear, and Clara's voice broke into a chorus of hundreds of overlapping, screaming human voices. The monster lunged. Ethan threw the heavy iron poker directly at the creature's chest and hit the front door handle. He threw his weight against the heavy oak door, bursting out into the freezing, rain-soaked night, just as a long, needle-sharp finger slashed across his shoulder, tearing through his jacket and leaving deep, icy gashes in his skin. Ethan didn't look back. He ran blindly into the pitch-black woods, tripping over roots, falling into freezing mud, and scrambling back up. Behind him, he could hear the creature moving through the canopy above, snapping branches and mimicking Clara's voice, calling to him from every direction in the darkness. "Ethan, come back. It's warm in the dark." He ran until his lungs felt like they were on fire, until the cabin lights vanished behind him, until the storm swallowed every sound except his own frantic gasps for air. At 6 a.m. the next morning, a logging truck driver found Ethan collapsed on the side of Route 9, suffering from severe hypothermia and shock. When county sheriff deputies investigated cabin 42 later that afternoon, they found the front door hanging open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the cabin was completely empty, except for 2 haunting details recorded in the official police report. First, sitting in the center of the living room table was Clara's silver music box, pristine, clean, and fully wound. Second, muddy footprints were tracked throughout the cabin floor. One pair belonged to Ethan's boots, leading frantically out the front door. The second pair of footprints didn't belong to a human. They were long, thin, 3-toed impressions etched into the wood. And they didn't come from outside. They started inside the attic, walked down into the living room, and ended right at the foot of Ethan's bed. If you ever find yourself renting a cabin in the deep forest, remember this story. Check the attic, lock the doors, and if you hear the voice of someone you love calling from the dark, do not answer. If this story gave you chills, leave a like, share this story with another horror fan, and subscribe to the channel for more Midnight Encounters.